Hello everyone, this is Reverend Dr. Roger Paul, and tonight we're going to continue our study with paper 77, the Midwayers, and we're in section 3, which starts on page 858.2. And get started. Would one of y'all like to say a prayer for us tonight? How about you, Rodney? Would you like to pray for us tonight and get us started? Catch my breath. Can you hear me, Rodney?
Yeah, okay, me. I didn't hear that.
Yeah.
Heavenly Father, we give thanks for each and every one of us and for this opportunity we have this evening to study the Midway preachers, the Tower of Babel, and in the Urantia book. And we pray for guidance, wisdom, and insight to discern the truth. We open our minds and hearts that we may share this revelation that we learn with other people. Now, Father, we devote this time to you, and even so, not our will, but yours be done.
Amen.
Amen. Jesus, Michael of Lebanon, amen.
Okay, Rodney, why don't you take the first slide, too? The Tower of Babel.
Okay, number section 3, the Tower of Babel. After the subversion...
Hang on, Rodney. Let me start the recording on this other thing, too. I'm sorry. Before we get started here, too far, so let's try this out. Record on this computer. Okay. All right, go ahead.
Okay, after the submergence of Dalmatia, the Nodites moved north and east, presently founding the new city of Dilmun as their racial and cultural headquarters. And about 50,000 years after the death of Nod, when the offspring of the prince's staff had become too numerous to find subsistence in the lands immediately surrounding their new city of Dilmun, and after they had reached out to intermarry with the Andonite and Singit tribes adjoining their borders, it occurred to their leaders that something should be done to preserve their racial unity. Accordingly, a council of the tribes was called, and after much deliberation, the plan of Babylon, the descendant of Nod, was endorsed.
Okay, so basically, the descendants of Nod, in the land of Nod, right, there was too many of them for the surrounding lands to support them, food-wise and everything else. So that's what they're talking about here. And if y'all remember that picture from last week, Delman was down near where the twin rivers come together, down in that area, right before right before where the Tigris and Euphrates comes together. I couldn't think. Anyway, so basically, we're getting to the point where civilization is taking hold, and basically, let's go. This is at the point where the legend of the Tower of Babel came into being. All right, and if we look at this picture here, this is a representation of the Tower of Babel on page 858. Okay, which was never completed. All right, let's see. Let me go next, and then we'll just go around from there. Bablock proposed to erect a pretentious temple of racial glorification at the center of their then occupied territory. This temple was to have a tower, the like of which the world had never seen. It was to be a monumental memorial to their passing greatness. There were many who wished to have this monument erected in Delman, but others contended that such a great structure should be placed at a safe distance from the dangers of the sea. All right, remembering the traditions of the engulfment of their first capital, Dalmatia. So we know that Dalmatia basically was overcome with water. It flooded. And that's what they're talking about, engulfment of their first capital in the sea. All right? Okay. Millie, would you take the next one, please?
Yes. Bablock planned that the new buildings should become the nucleus of the future center of the Nodite culture and civilization. His counsel finally prevailed, and construction was started in accordance with his plan. The new city was to be named Bablock, after the architect and builder of the tower. This location later became known as Babylon, and eventually as Babel.
Okay, so that's how it got to be known as the Tower of Babel, right? All right. Tim, would you take the next one, please?
But the Nodites were still somewhat divided in sentiment as to the plans and purposes of this undertaking. Neither were their leaders altogether agreed concerning either construction, plans, or usage of the buildings after they should be completed. After 4.5 years of work, a great dispute arose about the object and motive for the erection of the tower. The contentions became so bitter that all work stopped. The food carrier spread the news of the dissension, and large numbers of the tribes began to foregather at the building site. 3 differing views were propounded as to the purpose of building the tower.
Okay, so there was 3 different reasons they thought they should build this tower, right? And they didn't even know what the rooms in the building was going to be used for at this point, right? So, okay.
Hey, Roger,
Yeah.
you know, you're talking, but you're way off in the distance.
Really? You can barely hear me? Is that?
Oh, we can hear you, but you're definitely way over there.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
I can
can't-
hear you just fine.
Yeah, I can't help that because the camera and the microphone for the computers on the other side of the room
Okay, no problem.
for y'all to be able to see the screen. So,
Just keep speaking up, that's good.
all right. I need to get me a little microphone or something to fix that problem. Okay, Rodney, would you take this one, please?
Yeah, number 1, the largest group, almost 1/2, desired to see the tower built as a memorial of Nodite history and racial superiority. They thought it ought to be a great and imposing structure which would challenge the admiration of all future generations.
Okay, it's interesting that the Nodite descendants felt like they were racially superior right off the bat, right? Because they were the descendants of what? The rebellious 100, the group of the 100 that rebelled. That was the descendants of the Nodite. The Nodites were the group that actually rebelled against the universe. So they felt like because of their history and where they came from, that they were superior to the tribes and the people of the tribes that surrounded them. So that's what they're talking about, this Nodite history and racial superiority, okay, which is kind of interesting. That's a bad place to start from. Okay, I guess I'll take the next one too. The next largest faction wanted the tower designed to commemorate the Delman culture. They foresaw that Babylon would become a great center of commerce, art, and manufacture. All right, that was the second reason. All right, and this is the third. Billy, would you take it, please?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Very light.
Very good.
Very good.
Very light,
No, very good.
It's
very
perfect.
good.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm trying to get the book in front of me. It's very inconvenient to put to the side, but evidently my microphone is at the front of the computer.
But Melanie, you're coming in so much better than old Scott program.
Oh, yeah, you.
Good.
Yeah.
Number 3, the smallest and minority contingent held that the erection of the tower presented an opportunity for making atonement for the folly of their progenitors in participating in the Caligastia Rebellion. They maintained that the tower should be devoted to the worship of the Father of all, that the whole purpose of the new city should be to take the place of Dalmatia to function as a cultural and religious center for the surrounding barbarians.
Oh, yeah, that's
Okay.
We'll show you.
So we had one group that felt like that felt bad that their predecessors rebelled in the Caligastia Rebellion. Okay, and the ones that were more rebellious thought this was a really bad idea, right? Because they didn't think that people should remember them for being the ones that rebelled. Okay, so pride does a lot of things. Okay, Tim, would you take the next one?
The religious group were promptly voted down. The majority rejected the teaching that their ancestors had been guilty of rebellion. They resented such a racial stigma, having disposed of one of the 3 angels to the dispute and failing to settle the order 2 by debate. They failed to fighting. The religionists, the non-combatants, fled to their homes in the south, while their fellows fought until well-nigh obliterated.
Okay, so basically, none of them could come up with a consensus of why they were building this tower or why they should build this tower, right?
Sounds like some of the plans we had today. Let's build it.
Yeah.
We want to know what it's for.
That's right. Okay, Rodney, I think you're up again.
Okay, about 12,000 years ago, a second attempt to erect the Tower of Babel was made. The mixed races of the Andites, parentheses, Nodites and Edomites, undertook to raise a new temple on the ruins of the first structure. But there was not sufficient support for the enterprise. It fell of its own pretentious weight. It was long known as the land of Babel.
Okay, so we had a lot of reasons this whole project failed, didn't we? Let me turn my speakers here. I'm getting a little feedback here, and it might work a little bit better.
So I believe the only reason they really brought this up is because it happens to appear in the Bible, and they just thought that they would expound on
That's right.
the real reasons. Other than that, I don't see any reason for it being in there.
That's true. There really isn't any other reason, other than the fact that it gives us a good history of the Nodites and what happened to them. How the Nodites fit into society, and eventually bringing on the Phoenicians and the Syrians and everyone else. All the basic civilizations came from this same area, and we know that it was inhabited by the Nodites and the descendants of Adam, the Adamites, right? So, and of course the Andites, all right?
And I wonder approximately how long ago this was. I don't really see a reference to it.
Yeah. This was how long ago it was, Rodney? Is that what you said?
Approximately.
Yeah, it was. Oh Lord, we had that last week. I believe it was around close to 200,000 years ago.
200,000.
It says 12,000 years ago, a second attempt for the tower.
Yes, 12,000 years. That's right. 12,000. I'm sorry. 12,000 years ago.
Oh, about 12,000 years ago, yeah.
Yeah.
Right in front of me.
Well, this one also says about 50,000 years ago, after the death of Nod.
Yeah, it was 50,000 years after the death of Nod. You know, Nod was the leader of the Nodites, right? And he lived an extended period of time because he was of the Calagassa 100, but they eventually all died off because they didn't have access to the tree of life, right? So it's interesting though, because from the time of rebellion, which is about 250,000 years ago, if I remember correctly, up till the time, up to 12,000 years ago, that's a good 200,000 years easily. You know, so that's a long period of time things had to work out.
Well, the Gillespie Tepe thing, they date that back about 12,000 years, don't they?
Yeah, they do. They think it's
about the
12,000.
same time.
But the interesting thing about that, Rodney, is that dating could be wrong, and it could be wrong to the point where that could have been the area where Van and Abaddon had their civilization. You know what I'm saying? And
Yeah, they're still digging it up. So.
they're still digging it up, so that, you know, it's very possible that could be that, and it could be part of the second garden. We just don't know for sure. You know, so it's kind of interesting the different things. One thing's for sure, if you look at the carvings on the walls and things like that, all the carvings of our animals and things like that. So what they're doing is they're teaching people animal husbandry and agricultural, that sort of thing. And that's a perfect area to do that, because the people, I mean, you know, the guy that found that was a sheep herder, right? So there's several possibilities that could be. Did we yet, Rodney, or not? Let me go ahead and read it. About 12,000 years ago, a second attempt to erect a Tower of Babel was made. The mixed races of Endites, Nodites, and Adamites, that's the descendants of Adam, undertook to raise a new temple on the ruins of the first structure. But there was not sufficient support for the enterprise. It fell of its own pretentious weight. The region was long known as the Tower of Babel. Yeah, you just read that one. Okay.
Yeah, and it's funny, I asked how long ago, and I
Yeah.
I
That's all right. I've got so many things pulling at me different directions now. It's unreal. Let's see. Millie, I think you're up.
Okay, but you know, you just reread what Rodney had read.
Yeah, I know that. I realize that.
Okay, so this would have been yours, but Nodite centers of civilization. The dispersion of the Nodites was an immediate result of the internecine conflict over the Tower of Babel. This internal war greatly reduced the number of purer Nodites and was in many ways responsible for their failure to establish a great pre-Adamic civilization. From this time on, Nodite culture declined for over 120,000 years until it was upstepped by Adamic infusion. But even in the times of Adam, the Nodites were still an able people. Many of their mixed descendants were numbered among the garden builders, and several of Van's group captains were Nodites. Some of the most capable minds serving on Adam's staff were of this race.
Okay. Let's get something straightened out here. Time frame. The second Tower of Babel was about 12,000 years ago. Okay? The first one, I believe I'm right on this, was around 200,000 years ago. Okay? And that was built by the descendants of Nod. All right? And many of these went on to help build the second garden for Adam and Eve. Okay? And that was, what, 39,000 years ago. You follow me? Did I confuse everybody, or everybody still with me?
Okay, the timeline again, between the first tower
And the second tower is
and the
a,
first garden,
yeah.
what is the difference?
We're looking at about 150,000 years, I believe, from the first Tower of Babel to the second, to the garden, or to Adam and Eve.
Okay, 150, so the first tower was built 150,000 years before the first garden.
Yeah. Well, actually, I think they say 120,000 here.
120,000 years.
Yeah. Between,
And then the first garden, and then the second tower.
then there was a second garden, and then the second tower was well after that. That was just 12,000 years ago. So if you think of the second tower, it came right before whom? Melchizedek.
Well, let me ask you, this first tower was built before the garden? The
Yes.
savages that were living there at the time, these creatures, could
Right.
build this tower?
Right. Before the first Garden of Eden. Right.
They could go up more than one floor.
Yeah.
So hey Roger,
Yeah.
this was the 8th wraith on Urantia, correct?
Correct.
Okay, and they mentioned the pure Nodites versus that means there's two types, right?
Right.
Was there one that mingled with the outside?
Yeah, the pure Nodites only intermarried between themselves, and that were the pure Nodites would be considered the Caligastia 100 that rebelled and followed Nod into rebellion. Okay, and those were the pure Nodites. They did not mingle with the surrounding tribes and stuff. The non-pure Nodites were the Nodites that mixed with the surrounding tribes, and their descendants were the non-pure Nodites. Make sense?
Okay, thank you.
All right. Because it says here, okay, several of Van's group captains were Nodites. Do you see that? Van and Amidon were the ones that were loyal and hung around for 200,000 years until Adam and Eve showed up. And they were the ones that were eating the tree of life all that period of time. You follow me?
Yes.
Okay. All right. But some of the captains that helped build the garden were Nodites. All right? We're from the group that rebelled. All right? Let's see. Tim, would you take the next one? And I'm going to let you take the one after that too. Hang on.
Sure.
Let me, 'cause that's
3
the
out of
next-
4 great Nodite centers were established immediately following the Babylon conflict. 1. The Western or Syrian Nodites, the remnants of the nationalistic or racial memorialists, journeyed northward, uniting with the Andanites to found the late Nodite centers to the northwest of Mesopotamia. This was the largest group of the dispersing Nodites, and they contributed much to the later appearing Assyrian stock.
Okay. It's really, you can trace back all this stuff very detailed for the descendants of each race. All right. Rodney, would you take the next one, please?
Yeah, so what I'm getting out of it is the Assyrians have Nodite blood mostly.
I didn't catch that. Rodney, say that again.
The Assyrians, it seems, has most of Nodite blood.
That's correct. Mm-hmm.
That's what we're getting at here.
Yeah.
Okay, number 2, the Eastern or Elamite Nodites. The culture and commerce advocates migrated in large numbers eastward into Elam, and they're united with mixed Semitic tribes. The Elamites of 30 to 40,000 years ago had become largely Semitic in nature, although they continued to maintain a civilization superior to that of the surrounding barbarians.
So hey, Roger, this is also in reference to, you see how we're going down a list and it's becoming impure?
Yeah,
So that's basically what we're doing, correct?
that's correct. And in doing that, we're admixing more of the blood through the whole planet, right? You know, and it's interesting that it happened this way because, you know, now we have the different colored races, right? And eventually all the different colored races will intermarry and intermix to create one race over the entire planet, right? So when we have the yellow and the red and the black man and the Caucasian man and all these races mixing, intermingling, which they will do eventually, will end up in one large race sooner or later. And that's basically what happened here too, if you think about it, right? All right.
So the process, Roger, would be to have a material son and daughter come down, eventually have children, and then their children go out and mingle with the tribes to upstep the human race. Is that correct?
That's correct.
I'm learning.
Yeah, that's exactly correct. That is what their mission is, Tim. The mission of all the Adam and Eve's is to upstep the races on every single planet. So basically between 37 and 39,000 years ago, we had this violet blood mixed with our own to upstep our race. It didn't happen enough to do what that God really wanted to do, was to completely upstep the race, but we did get some benefit from it. So, and that was their mission.
But eventually, Roger, their children, Adam and Eve, they will die, correct?
That's correct. And they would.
But that's only if they if they default?
That's only if they default. If they don't default, the first generation of Adam and Eve's children would live indefinitely as long as they had the tree of life. After the first generation, though, all the children will eventually start to die off. Okay, regardless of whether they eat the tree of life or not.
So Roger,
Yeah,
if Urantia was a normal planet,
right.
we would still have Adam and Eve and their first children even now.
That's correct. That's correct. So we would have a whole generation of first generation children from Adam and Eve indefinitely that would live indefinitely as long as the tree of life was available. Right.
And we would still have the original planetary prince.
That's correct. We'd still have the
Even
original
now.
planetary prince. Now, also, if we would still had the original planetary prince, he would have been considered when we settle in enlightened life, the god of Urantia, right? That's the way it works. Where now we have Jesus of Nazareth is our planetary prince, and he's considered not only the god of the universe, but he's the god of Urantia. And Macaventia Melchizedek is his vicegerent planetary prince, right? Okay. All right, I believe I'm up again, I think. All right, after the establishment of the second garden, it was customary to allude to this nearby Nodite settlement as the land of Nod. And during this long period of relative peace between the Nodite group and the Adamites, the two races were greatly blended, for it became more and more the custom of the sons of God, the Adamites, to intermarry with the daughters of men, the Nodites, right? And that is,
The Bible.
that's directly out of the Bible. That's correct. Okay? That's what they're talking about here.
So the sons of God that it's talking about in the Bible were the Adamites.
Well, the Adamites, not the Nodites, right? But the daughters of men were the Nodites, right?
Yeah, okay, I understand.
Now remember, there's another quote in the Urantia book. It talks about the mighty men of old, the Nodites intermarrying with the daughters of the tribes, right? That's different. right? Because we're talking about the sons of God are the Adamites, right? And they marry with the daughters of men, which is the Nodites. Not the Nodites, the supermen marrying with the local tribes, okay? That was right after the default. There are two different things here they're talking about, okay?
So when they put that sons of God in here,
Yeah,
all they're doing really is just a parallel what's in the Bible.
that's right. But they literally are, Rodney, the sons of God, because they would be the sons of Adam. And Adam is a son of God. He's a descending son of God, right? So his sons would be the sons of God.
Interesting. Okay.
Right? Okay. Now, there's a difference between Adam's descendants, right, who are the sons of God, and us as sons of God, because we are faith sons of God, right? Where Adam's children would be actual sons of God before the faith. Make sense?
Makes sense.
All right. Big distinction there. Okay, Millie, would you take the next one, please?
Yes, I've got some cat issues here. 3. The Central or Pre-Sumerian Nodites. A small group at the mouth of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers maintained more of their racial integrity. They persisted for thousands of years and eventually furnished the Nodite ancestry, which blended with the Adamites to found the Sumerian peoples of historic times.
And the interesting here, they tell us where the Sumerians come from, right? Okay, and that's the ones that settled at the mouth of the Tigris and Euphrates. That's what we were talking about a little bit earlier. Okay, and that's basically where Samaria came from, and the Sumerian peoples of old. Now, why is this important? Most of the texts they're discovering around the old locations of Samaria are the Sumerian tablets, right? And if you go to all these shows that's on TV, like Ancient Aliens and things like that, they talk about these Sumerian tablets. Well, these Sumerians were the descendants of the Nodite ancestry blended with the Adamites. Okay? So that really is the first what? The first intelligent civilization that came up with a way of writing that was recorded we still have. Okay? So the Sumerian tablets were actually the descendants, the people that wrote those were the descendants of the Adamites and who? The Nodites. Okay? So that's why that's really important. And remember too, the Sumerians, you know, we have lots of pictures or carvings of things of the Sumerians with their beards, and they look like they're bigger than the other people and that sort of thing, right? So some of them were the descendants of the Nodites, and of course they were very large humans, you know, some of them up to 7 foot tall.
Basketball player.
Yeah. Interesting how all this stuff works out, isn't it? Okay. Tim, would you take the next one, please?
And all this explains how the Sumerians appeared so suddenly and mysteriously on the stage of action in Mesopotamia. Investigators will never be able to trace out and follow the tribes back to the beginning of the Sumerians, who had their origin 200,000 years ago after the submersion of Dalmatia. Without a trace of origin elsewhere in the world, these ancient tribes suddenly loom upon the horizon of civilization with a full-grown and superior culture, embracing temples, metalwork, agriculture, animals, pottery weaving, commercial laws, civil codes, religious ceremonies, and an old system of writing. At the beginning of the historic, they had long since lost the alphabet of Dalmatia, having adopted the peculiar writing system originating in Dilm. The Sumerian language, though virtually lost to the world, was not Semitic. It had much in common with the so-called Aryan tongues
Okay, now y'all think about this. Why is this so important? Because when these investigators try to trace back the Sumerians, they get lost, right? Because where they came from was 200,000 years old, all right? So suddenly this superior social culture emerged out of nowhere as far as everybody else is concerned, right? So that's why they think all these people think they're aliens coming from another planet. They brought their culture to this planet from another planet, and it's not so. Okay? They got their culture because they were here, they were the descendants of the original Dalmatia from 200,000 years ago, from the time of the rebellion. Okay? And so, when they settled in this area and they try to trace back their history past the time of the Sumerians, they have no history to trace back to because the history of Dalmatia is completely gone. Make sense? It's sunk into the ocean. There is nothing to find to trace them back further than Samaria. Okay.
So, hey Roger, I had a question.
Yeah.
The word Aryan, who are they referring to? Because the Hindus or the Vedic culture, they use the word Aryan. And when they say the so-called Aryan tongues, are they referring to the Sumerians?
Yeah, they're referring to the Sumerians and basically all the original lighter color races, like the white race, the yellow race. Who else would be included in that? Probably the red race, that sort of thing. And they all descended from the Nodites and the Adamites and the basically. I can't think. Andites.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, the Andites.
Yeah, which reminds me of that movie called The Fourth Kind. I don't know if you've seen it, but there's a part where they mention the Sumerians.
Really?
Mm-hmm. Much of the stories and all that they got was from the Sumerians, and they have a small little clip. It was really amazing about spacemen coming down from other planets.
Yeah.
It's called the Fourth Kind.
yeah, and they think they came from another planet because they can't trace their origins.
Well, because the people too, they also drew what these people looked like, and it looked like they had like a mask on it.
Yeah, headdress and things like that. This is some tablets of the Sumerians, basically during the Sumerian time, and there's art like this that's being discovered constantly in that area. So, okay, let's keep going. Rodney, would you take the next one, please?
All right. I have a note here.
Did I skip over Millie? Did Millie read on that stuff for you?
We're on verse 8, the elaborate records, Rodney.
Yep. You want me to go on, Roger?
Yeah, go on.
Okay. The elaborate records left by the Sumerians describe the site of a remarkable settlement which was located in the Persian Gulf near the earlier city of Dilmun. The Egyptians called this city of ancient Ori Dilmun, while the later Adamized Sumerians confused both the first and second Nodite cities with Dalmatia and called all three Dilmun. And already have archaeologists found these ancient Sumerian clay tablets which tell of this earthly paradise, quote, where the gods first blessed mankind with the example of civilized and cultured life. In these tablets, descriptive of Dilmun, the paradise of men and God, are now silently resting on the dusty shelves of many museums.
Isn't that interesting? So there's records of this in museums. Well, they haven't been destroyed now, which many things have been. But basically they're talking about the first and second Nodite cities, and called confusing them with Dalmatian, and called all three Delman, which was the first city of the Nodites. So it's kind of interesting how the records of the Sumerian actually state information about Delman itself and then refer back to Dalmatia. So we've got history in there, in the writings that's out there, it's just we don't know how to interpret it, right? The Sumerians well knew of the first and second Edens, but despite extensive intermarriage with the Adamites, continued to regard the garden dwellers to the north as an alien race. Sumerian pride in the more ancient Nodite culture led them to ignore these later vistas of glory in favor of the grander and paradisiacal traditions of the city of Delman. So they dismissed the first and second garden. In place of it, they put the legends of Delman there. Right?
Which reminds me of a question, Roger.
Yeah.
The whole Atlantis is really in reference to the Garden of Eden, correct?
Yeah, it really is, because the description of Atlantis really describes the location of the garden, the first garden exactly, you know, and even how the garden sunk into the water, you know, I mean it just literally sank over a period of time. So I think that people that are looking for Atlantis will keep looking, and if they ever find the ruins that they talk about in the Urantia book of the first garden, they will try to tell us it's Atlantis, basically. So it's kind of interesting how things like that work out. And you can look at the location. We've talked about this before, right off the mainland. There where it connected. And where we're talking about is, let's see if we can find it. See, they got basically, see where the Persian Gulf is? There's Delman right up there. Do y'all see that in this picture?
It's blurry.
But it's probably blurry, but those who are looking at this through the video online, Delman is right here. It's right above where Dalmatia would have been. See, this is the location of Dalmatia. It sank in the Persian Gulf, basically. Delman was started right above it, okay? And that's where Sumner is, and this is where the Tigris and Euphrates come together. Now, if you look over here, where it says Syria, that is where the first garden was, okay? Lake Van is up here. That location where they think Van was may be on the other side, and that may be where, what is it, Globotepe is. All right, and here's Elam. This is the land of Nod. Okay, I think I got another picture here, if I'm not mistaken. That may be a little bit better. Okay, this is the first garden, right? This is the coast I was talking about. This is where they think, some people believe Atlantis was. That is actually the location of the first garden. And underneath this purple dot is Cyprus. Okay, Cyprus would have been part of the first garden. Okay, the second garden would have been down here, in between the Tigris and Euphrates again. And of course we know this is Dalmatia, and this is Delman here. You see the closeness of the proximity? Like Van's right here. Now, there's some question as to whether the second garden was right here or up here where the Globotepe is, right? Or of course, like I said, Globotepe could have been the location of just Van and Amidon. So, we're not sure. It's all speculation when it comes right down to it. Okay, another picture. There's Cyprus, right? To the right would have been what? The first garden, right? All right. This is all right. Where would Dalmatia be? It'd be right here, right? The Persian Gulf. And right above it would have been Delman, and then this is where we're talking about where is, and the Tower of Babylon. This is Babylon. See this here? That's where the Tower of Babel would have been. Make sense?
Makes sense.
All right. And this is interesting. This is a piece of pottery from Delman. Okay?
Well, it's got your ranches similar.
Look at that. What is that?
Yep. Paradise Trinity.
That's right. That's right. The Paradise Trinity. God the Father, God the Son, God the Spirit. Right? Where does it say this is from? It's pottery from Delman.
They say that Garden of, the land that broke up in the sank was done in circles.
Yes, it was. And if y'all look at, from above, if you look at I wish I could pronounce that word better.
Tepe.
Yeah, Globotepe. If you look at it from the above, what does it have? Concentric circles.
Circles.
Yeah.
Concentric circles.
Same thing, right?
Do they give us a date on the pottery?
Well, they gave it's an estimate. Let me see. Let me go down. It may be on this. No, it's in French. I can't read it. So here's some more. More there. These are all from the same area. Okay. Receipt for garments to be sent by boat to Delman. You see this right here? It says dated to year 1 from Remember that we just looked at just a minute ago? Remember that? When we go back, what are we talking about here?
Hey, speaking of
sorry.
Roger, I had a question for you.
Right
Is
here.
Abraham also referred to as Nordon?
That I don't know, Tim.
Okay.
I've never heard of him be referred to that. Does anybody recognize this writing?
Samaria.
Yeah, that's right.
And that was way before the Hebrews had a language, correct?
That's right, it is, way before. Cuneiform tablets, yeah, right? It says here, this tablet was a typical bureaucratic compilation of the III dynasty. It is a register of fields and their yields over 1 year. It is one of the largest cuneiform tablets so far known. Right there, right? And it says dated to year 3 of Abisin, king of Ur, 2026 BC, from Irma. Cuneiform. And they think that's the oldest known writing, but we know that that's not true because they had writing in Dalmatia, right? Okay. Well, we went through a lot of things there, didn't we? Short period of time. All right. Now I've lost track of who's reading. I think Billy's up.
Number 4, the northern Nodites and Amdonites and Dolomite, the Vanities.
Vanites.
Hannah.
Vanites.
Right.
This group arose prior to the Babylonian conflict. These northernmost Nodites were descendants of those who had forsaken the leadership of Nod and his successors for that of Van and Amadon.
Remember, Van and Amadon were the ones that were loyal. They had the tree of life, right? So they forsook Nod and started following Dan and Amadon. Right? Okay. Tim, I think you're up.
Oh, I'm sorry. I had my microphone on mute.
Okay.
So my question was, did Van have children? Were these the descendants of Van, since they're called Vanites?
That
I
is
always have that question myself.
that is probably true because you know Van and Amadon left the garden with 132 women and children. Right? They were the only two males. You follow me?
Yes.
So if they had descendants, where'd they come from? They had to come from those 132 women and children, right?
Or could it be the possibility of him naming his tribe and the people?
That's
Or-
possible too.
Right, because remember, tribes had to have marks.
Right.
Didn't they have names also associated with them? So maybe
Yeah.
they were called the Van Knights.
Yeah. Now, there is one caveat to Van having children, and what is that? Van stayed loyal the whole time between the Calagassa Rebellion up to the point of Adam and Eve, right? And the original group of the garden beings were not supposed to mix with the local tribes, right? So that would mean that Van would probably not himself mix to have children, okay?
Amadon,
But Amadon might, because Amadon was one of the local natives and he was changed when he gave his life plasm for Van.
well,
Right.
definitely.
Huh?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he probably the Vanite descendants were probably all from Amadon, more than likely. Okay. All right. Let's see. Tim, did you just read or not? No.
No.
You're up.
Oh, no.
No, Millie just read.
Some of the earlier associates of Van subsequently settled about the shores of the lake, which still bears his name, and the traditions grew up about his locality. Ararat became their sacred mountain, having much the same meaning to latter-day Vanites that Sinai had to the Hebrews. 10,000 years ago, the Vanites, ancestors of the Assyrians, taught that their moral law of 7 commandments had been given to Van, the gods upon Mount Ararat. They firmly believed that Van and his associates, Amadon, were taken alive from the planet while they were up on the mountain, engaged in worship.
Okay. It's funny how these stories originate, isn't it? Okay, so Ararat became their sacred mountain, right? It's also interesting that Ararat is supposedly the place they keep trying to say that the Noah's Ark landed on, right? Same area. But we know that the Noah's Ark story is basically a myth, other than the fact that Noah did exist and he did build a boat.
So hey Roger, what exactly is Ararat? Is that a reference?
That's a mountain.
That's a mountain, okay.
Yeah.
Is there any reference to Mount Sinai? Because I was watching a documentary, and these archaeologists had they did the research, and basically, you know how it's mentioned in the Bible, volcanoes?
Yeah.
They have a 10,000-year-old something, and basically they're trying to say that Mount Sinai was never active because they had the proof. You know, they could do. So, but they did say that was somewhere in Arabia, not where it's supposed to be today.
Yeah.
Where in the Bible.
That's interesting. I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah, it's really amazing.
Yeah.
But the one way you can tell if Mount Sinai was really, you know, it would have been active, a volcano, and they tested for that.
That's interesting because Sinai, the stories about the Hebrews and Sinai, it would had to have been an active volcano during that period of time. You know.
But they're saying it wasn't in the place where it is that we know of it, but somewhere in Arabia, another location.
That's interesting. You never can tell what people come up with, right? All right. I believe you're up.
Modern.
Rodney.
Mount Ararat was the sacred mountain of northern Mesopotamia. And since much of your tradition of these ancient times was acquired in connection with the Babylonian story of the flood, it is not surprising that Mount Ararat is and its region were woven into the later Jewish story of Noah and the universal flood.
It's funny how these things get weaved into all sorts of stuff. Okay, and there's basically a relief of Noah and the flood here. Noah and the universal flood. Let's see. Okay, about 35,000 BC, Adamson visited one of the easternmost of the old Vanite settlements to find his center of civilization. Okay. And we know who Adamson was, right? Adamson was the son of Adam. Okay? And that would have been about 35,000 years ago. That's about 2,000 years after his father came to the planet. All right? All right. Millie, would you take the next one, please?
Yes, Adamson and Rodham, having delineated the Nodite and antecedents of the ancestry of the secondary Midwayers, this narrative should now give consideration to the Adamic half of their ancestry, for the secondary Midwayers are also the grandchildren of Adamson, the firstborn of the violet race of Urantia.
All right. Y'all follow all that? Okay, so they told us about the Nodite descendants, right? And now they're and the ancestry of the secondary Midwayers, and they're going to talk about the secondary Midwayers and how they came into being. All right, so. Okay. Tim, would you take the next one, please?
Adamson was among that group of the children of Adam and Eve who elected to remain on earth with their father and mother. Now this eldest son, Adam, had often heard from Van and Amadon the story of their highland home in the north. And sometime after the establishment of the second garden, he determined to go in search of this land of his youthful dreams.
So when he was a child, he heard these stories from directly from Van and Amadon of their area where they were. All right. So he went looking for this.
Their highland home in the
Highland
north.
home.
Too.
Yeah. And if you think about it, Globotepe would be a perfect example of a highland home, right? So let's keep going. Robbie, would you take the next one?
Adamson was 120 years old at this time. Imagine that. And had been the father of 32 pure-line children of the first garden. He wanted to remain with his parents and assist them in upholding the second garden. But he was greatly disturbed by the loss of his mate and their children, who had all elected to go to Adentia along with those other Adamic children who chose to become wards of the Most High.
Now y'all remember the story when Adam and Eve defaulted when they were leaving the garden, right? Along the trail, leaving the garden, the transports arrived and took away a good portion of Adam and Eve's children and grandchildren. And Adamson's wife chose to leave with their children, okay? And Adamson, decided to stay. Okay, so that's what they're talking about here. So that's why he was disturbed with the loss of his wife and their children. Okay? Let's go on this a little bit further here. Adamson.
32 Pure Line children.
32 pure,
His wife all went to the
all went to the mansion worlds. Yeah. Yep. All right. Or not the mansion worlds. They went to Adentia. I'm sorry.
adventure.
Yeah.
Do they give us an idea of how long Adamson could live on Urantia?
Indefinitely. As long as he had the tree of life, he could have lived indefinitely.
But I
But
thought that was destroyed in the
it
first.
was destroyed. That's what I'm saying. As long as he had the tree of life, he could have lived indefinitely. But since he no longer had the tree of life, then he would die like anybody else would. So when he chose to stay, he knew he had a shorter life that he would be here. Even though it would be longer than a normal human being, it would be much shorter than what he was capable of living if he would have had the tree of life to sustain him, right?
Okay, thank you.
Roger, you probably already answered this, but the 32 children and his wife and the other children that were taken to Adentia, how were they transported?
By seraphic transport.
Okay, they weren't translated.
They weren't
their physical
translated.
bodies,
They had to be, the essence of them had to be taken out of their human form and put into the seraphic transport.
gotcha, all right.
Okay?
Yes, because in paper one, Roger, it says that they cannot transport combustion bodies.
That's
That they
right.
have to be in seraphim.
That's right.
I don't
So,
know how that happens or what that means. They go into a liquid form.
well, no, actually, the essence of their soul and who they are removed from the physical body, and the physical body's discarded. So, probably, if y'all think about this for a second, they were on a road leaving the garden, right? And so the seraphic transport shows up, right? When they showed up, they had to have a way of taking them out of their physical forms and put them in the seraphic transport, right? So, one of two things had to have happened. They had to remove the essence of who they are and put them in the seraphic transport and left the body just boom, there where it was, or the seraphic, whoever put them in the seraphic transport had to decompose the bodies themselves so they would not be visible to the parents. You see what I'm saying? So either of the two could have happened, but that would have been terribly, horribly sad to see your lifeless body of your wife and your children after their soul had been removed. Right? I mean, think about that. So probably whoever put the beings in the seraphic transports, the master physical controllers, probably disintegrated the bodies after they were removed, more than likely.
And there is a difference between being in seraphim and being translated. Translated, like, takes place on the Morancha worlds, where
No,
there's a flash.
Translated happens on this planet, and that's a flash of light, okay? Actually, it's so intense it consumes the human body, okay? So, basically, those that are translated in this human form, their body's taken up in a ball of fire. They just disappear, okay? Where that is not what happened to these children and his wife. They were actually in seraphim to take off the planet. That's a different thing, whole totally different thing. So,
Okay, thank you.
all right. Lots of ways to leave the planet, really, that we don't know about, I'm sure. All right, who's up?
You,
I just read.
Rodney, I think you're up.
Okay, Adamson would not desert his parents on the rancho. He was
Disinclined.
disinclined to flee from hardship or danger, but he found the associations of the second garden far from satisfying. He did much to forward the early activities of defense and construction, but decided to leave for the north at the earliest opportunity. And though his departure was full of planning, Adam and Eve were much grieved to lose their eldest son, to have him go out into a strange and hostile world, as they feared never to return.
Boy, that must have been really tough on him, you know? You think about it. All right. A company of 27 followed Adamson northward in the quest of these peoples of his childhood fantasies. In a little over 3 years, Adamson's party actually found the object of their adventure, and among these people he discovered a wonderful and beautiful woman, 20 years old, who claimed to be the last pure line descendant of the Princess Staff. This woman, Rada, said that her ancestors were all descendants of 2 of the fallen staff of the prince. She was the last of her race. Having no living brothers or sisters, she had about decided not to mate, had about made up her mind to die without issue, but she lost her heart to the majestic Adamson. And when he heard of the story of Eden, she heard the story of Eden, how the predictions of Van and Abaddon had really come to pass. And as she listened to the recital of the garden default, she was encompassed with but one single thought: to marry the son and heir of Adam. And quickly the idea grew upon Adamson, and in a little more than 3 months they were married. So she was the last pure line of the Nodites that Adamson decided to marry. Okay?
That's cool.
Yeah. Pretty neat. Millie, would you take the next one?
Yes. Adamson and Rada had a family of 67 children.
Oh,
They gave origin to a great line of the world's leadership, but they did something more. It should be remembered that both of these beings were really superhuman. Every 4th child born to them was of a unique order. It was often invisible. Never in the world's history had such a thing occurred. Rada was greatly perturbed, even superstitious, but Adamson well knew of the existence of the primary Midwayers, and he concluded that something similar was transpiring before his eyes. When the second strangely behaving offspring arrived, he decided to mate them, since one was male and the other female. And this was the origin of the secondary order of Midwayers. Within 100 years, before this phenomenon ceased, almost 2,000 were brought into being.
Okay, this is very, very important, y'all. We're talking about Adamson and Rada had two children that were different, right? Than all the other children. There was a unique order. It was more like the primary Midwayers. So Adam decided to make the male and the female, all right, of these unique children, and all the secondary Midwayers were the children of this pair. Okay, so the 2,000 secondary Midwayers were brought into being from the children of Adamson and Rada. Make sense?
I've got a comment and a question.
Yeah.
And one of the comment is, I wonder what it's like to give birth to an invisible child.
I have no idea.
And and then the next question, the question is, both Adamson and Rada could see these children.
Well, remember, Adamson and Rada were direct descendants. Adamson was a descendant of Adam and Eve, so he had expanded vision, right? Rada would have had expanded vision also because she was the first descendant of the Caligasha 100. Okay, so she would have expanded vision also. So both of them would be able to see not only the invisible children, right, but she could also see some of the lower orders of angels and probably some of the prince's staff, right?
So what kind of diapers did they use? Invisible diapers?
That you got me.
I don't know. I mean,
I don't either. I don't.
invisible birds?
I
You
would
need
think.
diapers for invisible poop.
Well, I honestly think that they would probably be born pretty much full grown. You know, if you think about it, because
Oh, grown.
yeah,
he was
I
going
mean,
on 32,
you know,
right?
yeah. Keep this in mind.
Maybe that would be.
These are children that would not get sustenance from human food or anything like that. You know,
Exactly.
they would be fueled by the circuits and light. All right, so their whole upbringing would have been different than any other child.
You know, it's too bad they didn't go into a little detail on this stuff.
Yeah, it would have been interesting.
So
I've got a lot of questions about that.
Yeah,
So, hey, Roger, basically, she could see her child, correct?
right, and he could
But-
see the child,
But mortals couldn't.
but mortals could not. That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was going to say, if she couldn't see the child, I guess, could she feel the birth pain? Probably not.
Probably, I don't know. You know, I really don't.
Yeah.
Embarrassing.
I'm not even sure how you know you had a child. Seeing him, so
Exactly, that's weird.
yeah, it's a little bit strange. All right, next page. Now I've lost track of who's. I think Tim's up.
Read this list.
Okay, Adamson lived for 396 years. Many times he returned to visit his father and mother. Every 7 years, he and Rata journeyed south to the second garden. And meanwhile, the Midwayers kept him informed regarding the welfare of his people. During Adamson's life, they did great service in upbuilding a new and independent world center for truth and righteousness.
Okay, now keep in mind, a midwayer doesn't have a physical body in the way we think, and midwayers can travel something like 3,000 miles per second. You know, so they move really fast. So that's why how they could keep Adamson informed of everything that was going on away from him, right?
Roger,
Yeah,
that Gillespie place could be what Adamson built.
that could very well be.
You know, an independent world center of truth and righteousness.
Yeah,
And those were temples that were built.
yeah, could
Hey,
very well
Roger.
be.
You said they could travel how fast?
I think they can travel around 3,000 miles per second.
And that's the primary and the secondary?
I don't know which is which. I don't know if it was the primary I read that about or the secondary. It was probably the secondary though. So, but you can look that up. You know.
3,000 miles per second.
I think it's like 3,000 miles per second. They can almost go around the world in less than 5-10 seconds.
So there's no friction whatsoever.
No, because they don't have physical bodies as we know it. You know.
Would it be considered spiritual bodies?
Yeah, I guess. You know, you'd think of them as a more spiritual. I think of it more upon more along the lines of they're vibrating at a different frequency than we are. You know.
Well, that would be like a Morancha body sort of.
Right. Yeah, closer to Morancha. Well, they're not really Morancha because that's why they're called Midway. They're not human and they're not Morancha. Right?
They're in between.
They're between. That's right. In between. That's why they call them midwayer creatures.
Exactly.
Right?
But they were way before, the primary and secondary were way before Adamson and Rata had children, correct?
That's correct. No. The secondary were after Adamson and Rata had children. Their firstborn.
From Adamson and Ray.
I thought they came to being by something unusual happening with the
No,
planetary
no.
prince in '66.
That's the primary. That's the
that's
primary
We're
midwayers.
reading about the secondary right here.
Okay, wonderful.
This is the secondary midwayers. The secondary midwayers were children of the child, a male child and a female child of Adam, son, and Rada. And all the secondary midwayers came from that pair. All right? All right, it's also interesting here they tell us how many years that Adamson lived. You know, he did not have access to the tree of life any longer, and still he lived 396 years, which is much longer than the average person on the planet during that period of time, right? At least 4 to 5 times. So,
They don't say how long Rada lived.
probably she lived quite a long time too, I would think, because of her connection with the Nodites, you know, being descendants of the Nodites. All right, I think Rodney's up again.
I just read.
Okay, Addison and Rada thus had at their command this corps of marvelous helpers who labored with them throughout their long lives to assist in the propagation of advanced truth and in the spread of higher standards of spiritual, intellectual, and ethical living. And the results of this effort at world betterment never did become fully eclipsed by subsequent retrogression.
So what they did made a lasting impression on all the world and all the generations after that, right? That's what they're talking about here. It didn't ever be fully eclipsed by subsequent retrogression. So even though things went downhill, the things that they did was not affected by that. All right? The Adamsonites maintained a high culture for almost 7,000 years from the times of Adamson and Rada, for 7,000 years after they died. Later on, they become mixed with the neighboring Nodites and Andonites, and were also included among the mighty men of old. And some of the advances of that age persisted to become a latent part of the cultural potential which later blossomed into European civilization.
Most Europeans came from there.
That's right. Millie, I think you're up next.
This center of civilization was situated in the region east of the southern end of the Caspian Sea, near the Kopet Dagh. Whoa, that sounds a whole lot like Kopeki.
I was going to ask if we could look that up on the map.
Yeah.
A short way up in the foothills of Turkestan are the vestiges of what was one time the Adamsonite headquarters of the Violet Race.
Where are they talking about there, y'all? We're exactly where Globitech is, right?
That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, okay.
In these highland sites, situated in a narrow and ancient fertile belt, lying in the lower foothills of the Kopet Range, there successively arose at various periods 4 diverse cultures, respectively fostered by 4 different groups of Adamson's descendants. It was the second of these groups which migrated westward to Greece and the islands of the Mediterranean. The residue of Adam's descendants migrated north and west to enter Europe with the blended stock of the last Andite wave coming out of Mesopotamia. And they were also numbered among the Andite Aryan invaders of India.
So we can see the heritage of a lot of different groups from these beings and things. And
Did you want to stop there, Roger?
Yeah, I'm gonna have to stop there and we'll take this
We
up
have
next
3 more
time.
sections to go.
Yeah, we'll take this up next time. Let's have a short prayer. Are you gonna get on my keyboard? Let's have a short prayer and we'll close for the night and start this next week. Father, thank you for the ability to come together tonight and blessing us with this new way to meet, that we might have more success with our meetings. We thank you We give you the praise and thank you for this information we learned tonight. Help us share it with others. We thank you and give you the praise in the name of your Son, Jesus of Nazareth, Michael of Noah. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you for joining us at home. Please come see us again. Stop the video here.